I am grateful for the invitation to spend time with you. Of course, the topic of religious liberty is at the forefront of our minds as we head into the election. Due to the Health and Human Services mandate, Catholics and Catholic institutions are facing grave and immediate threats to the freedom of consciences. If the mandate stands, millions of Catholics, like yourselves, will face a difficult discernment about how to preserve their integrity while practicing their trades and engaging in their ministries. I have every confidence and hope that the Health and Human Service mandate will not stand. More than 40 Catholic institutions have filed separate strategic lawsuits against the federal government, which the Archdiocese has supported financially. I expect that these lawsuits will be successful. Catholics in industry have also filed lawsuits, claiming that the Health and Human Service mandate violates their right to free exercise of religion, particularly in their personal businesses. In fact, the most successful lawsuit to date has been filed by the Newland family of Denver on behalf of their company, Hercules Industries. I had lunch with the Newland family last week, and I was happy to hear that their lawsuit is progressing. They have received a temporary injunction which exempts them from providing contraceptives to their employees. If they are successful, they will open doors for other Catholics who have personal businesses to claim their right to religious liberty. But today, the Health and Human Service mandate is the law of the land, and more threats to our religious liberty are likely coming. Catholic business owners face a discernment in conscience, which is not something new for physicians and medical professionals. You have long faced the challenge of practicing your craft under pressing and immediate threats to the primacy of your conscience. 4 years ago, the bishops of Arizona noted, and I quote, "Pressure to violate one's conscience is an increasing reality for today's doctors, nurses, and pharmacists. Medical professionals face ridicule and difficult ramifications if they are unwilling to participate in or sanction abortions in the course of their work. Likewise, pharmacists in our communities feel compelled and are being forced to violate their conscience, especially in the distribution of medication that may act as an abortifacient." End of quote. What has been reality for medical professionals for far too long is now becoming reality for millions of Americans across our country. The culture of death, which has long been a facet of modern medicine, is now enshrined in law and imposed on all of us. Because you have faced the culture of death in your work, I call you, as your Archbishop, to be leaders in the culture of life, to be those who are willing to give of yourselves and to sacrifice of yourselves. The Second Vatican Council insists that members of the lay faithful, like you, are to take up this obligation. Lumen Gentium decrees that since laity are tightly bound up in all types of temporal affairs, it is their special task to order and to throw light upon these affairs in such a way that they may come into being and then continually increase according to Christ, to the praise of the Creator and the Redeemer. It is precisely the role of the laity to be those who act as leaven in society, and to order society according to the values of our God. We face grave threats to religious liberty and freedom of conscience. You have an obligation and a challenge to oppose them, but to oppose them, we must understand them. We must understand the mentality that leads to the challenges that we now face. In short, we must understand the dictatorship of relativism. Our Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, has spoken about that, and before he was elected Pope, he also spoke about it when he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. We live in a complex secular culture and are inevitably exposed to a variety of ideas that are incompatible with the truths of faith. Some believers are pure materialists who deny the existence of God and of any spiritual reality at all. In their view, nothing has intrinsic value, not even human beings, since everything about them is thought to be just a more complex evolution of matter. For materialists, values arise from whatever people happen to think or want at that particular moment. Most contemporary materialists tend to value pleasant states of consciousness and to think that the point of life is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. We can certainly see that in a culture that so often changes its way of dress, that constantly purchases new clothes, that focuses on the kinds of cars we drive and the other material items that we have. Other non-believers recognize the existence of spiritual reality, and specifically of the human soul. Many take this to an extreme by adopting a dualistic view of the human person. They identify the true person with the soul or conscious subject and consider the body as merely instrumental. This view has significant consequences too. It inclines people to regard the sexual differences as merely anatomical, and it then opens the door to all sorts of sexual behavior that is incongruous. It inclines the person to regard the reproductive dimension of human sexuality as purely biological and functional, and thus to approve things such as contraception, abortion, same-sex, sex outside of marriage, and everything else. They separate very, very clearly the unitive and procreative parts of human sexuality. They separate male and female and do not see that they were made for one another. It also, and furthermore, inclines them to regard an incurable illness as an indication that the body has outlived its usefulness, and thus it is fine to approve physician-assisted suicide. Still, other believers are relativists or subjectivists who deny that it is possible to reach objective truth at all. Some who do not quite go that far nevertheless assume that truth cannot be expressed and handed on, but only gotten hold of in some mysterious way. As a result, they tend to think that the formulations used to establish doctrine can be put aside. They also tend to regard moral norms as mere rules that can be dismissed when they become too demanding. Although these different views are conceptually distinct, people tend not to be consistent in holding to one or the other of them. Rather, they tend to mix together elements of these and other systems in their own thinking, while also assimilating cultural values like our excessive emphasis on youth, self-sufficiency, and consumer goods. In many ways, their views are like shifting sands that are open to any wind. They will go in one direction and then in another direction. We have only to look around our world to see the culture of death, which these and other strains of secularist thought have produced. Abortion today is commonplace throughout the world and regarded by many as a right. Along with other forms of wrongful killing, it is not only legal, but even publicly funded. Today, access to contraception, in short, access to free sexual activity, has also come to be regarded as an absolute fundamental right. People fail to see and to recognize the consequences of these behaviors and what happens to persons once they discover the truth and have to face the reality of what they have done. This is a perversion of even a basic understanding of human rights, human dignity, and the gift of human sexuality. We must oppose this distortion in three ways. The first is by educating on the issues themselves and on the issue of conscience. Those with expertise in health care should be active in the debate about what constitutes health care and should proclaim the dangers to women and families which stem from abortion and contraception. Those with expertise in the law should be active in explaining the grave danger which comes from divorcing law from its constitutional basis. The great confusion of our day will only be resolved by active education from well-formed lay Catholics. This means you. Further, the sense of conscience in our day is lost. Conscience in Catholic teaching is God's law written on the human heart. The Catechism of the Catholic Church speaks of it as the most secret core and sanctuary of a man, where he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths. It is the voice of God that we listen to, not our own voice. To obey conscience is the very dignity of man. According to it, he will be judged. We are always obliged to follow our conscience because it is our last and best judgment about the morality of a particular act. But we must also understand that we must form our consciences. Catholics sometimes say they are following their conscience when they choose to do something. For example, maybe tell a lie, or promote or fund contraception or abortion, defraud someone, conceive a child through in vitro fertilization. The Church teaches that all of these are intrinsically evil because they distort the dignity of human sexuality and the dignity of the human being. Though conscience is primary in Christian moral life, too many Catholics simply defer to the maxim, follow your conscience. Without proper explanation, such guidance is misleading because it suggests that people are responsibly following their conscience when they knowingly replace Christ's teaching with the world's opinions. Our conscience, our last and best judgment about what morality concretely requires, can be mistaken. In the words of the Catechism, conscience can make either a right judgment in accordance with reason and the divine law, or, on the contrary, an erroneous judgment that departs from them. It is important for us to understand that truth, that we can make erroneous judgments. Therefore, we must be willing to educate on the formation of conscience. We must be willing, no matter what the cost, to recognize moral truth when it becomes clear. We begin to discover moral truth by reflecting on the principles of natural law, the law God has written in our hearts. These principles are not externally imposed rules, but the intrinsic requirements implied by true respect for everything that is humanly good. They include our awareness that we should always do what is morally upright, that we should love God and neighbor, that we should never intentionally harm ourselves or others, that we should always treat others fairly. We must also fight the dictatorship of relativism through education. We also fight it with our votes and through an understanding of the priority of moral issues. Though there are a host of very real moral issues for Catholics in public and political life to consider, every Catholic has a primary obligation to oppose legal protection for those things which are inherently evil: abortion and euthanasia. Legal and political protection for inherent evil social acts undermines the entire social welfare. Blessed John Paul II reflected that, and I quote, "It is impossible to further the common good without acknowledging and defending the right to life, upon which all other inalienable rights of individuals are founded and from which they develop." End of quote. The right to life must always be the first consideration of Catholics. We must vote to end legal protection for abortion, and we must encourage others to do the same. We cannot just simply say, "I am personally opposed to abortion," but will support the choice of others. It is important for us to constantly speak to the dignity of human life. For each and every one of us, our lives began at the moment of conception. God is not even in that equation. Science demonstrates that. You and I, each one of us, and every human being on this planet, their life began when a sperm and an egg came together in their mother's womb. And it's important to understand that truth and that reality and the dignity that is there. Certainly for us as Catholics, we believe that we are created in God's image and likeness. But science itself demonstrates when life began for us. The right to life must always be the first consideration of Catholics. Finally, we can combat the dictatorship of relativism through our spiritual lives. This means recognizing that we are in a spiritual battle. We are in a battle between good and evil. We must constantly live that out, depending on the grace that Christ provides to us. When we combat the dictatorship of relativism through our spiritual lives, our enemies in these fights are not those with whom we disagree. They are often at times the ones we should be working for, the ones who need to encounter the love of our Father. Our enemies are our spiritual enemies, the minions of the evil one, who sow seeds of doubt, confusion, and moral uncertainty. Disorder and chaos is the mark of the evil one. Confusion is the mark of the evil one. And we see disorder and chaos everywhere in the political and cultural life of the United States. We can see those divisions and see how evident they are. It is important for us in this battle to be those who point others to the truth and to the goodness of our God. We must recognize that we do have enemies and those who are opposed to us, but we must always propose the truth with charity. And so it is important that we also fight with our prayers and our sacrifices. We must fast. We must spend time in adoration. We must constantly hold up Jesus Christ, because we know in faith the battle has been won and Christ has won it. We no longer, as Catholics, can be those who are complacent or those who just let things go. We must be willing to enter into the fray of things and to proclaim the good news of Christ. We must carry out the task that has been entrusted to us in the gospel and by the Second Vatican Council, to be those who live our faith in society and to transform society. In that, we must entrust our nation, our liberty, our very lives to the providence of God, which has conquered all sin and death. And through the intercession of Mary, the Mother of God, who gave life to Jesus Christ, in the incarnation, God entered into human history. We can be confident that God is with us in this battle. And so, in conclusion then, we must be those people who continually hold up the culture of life and the gospel of life. And we must do that in every field, whether it be the medical, the legal, the political, or the media. I have often told Catholics that the place to become involved, and especially young Catholics, is in the political arena and the media, because that is where society needs to change. The media is not on our side, and all of you, I think, are aware of that. And it's important for us as Catholics to enter into that and to begin to promote the gospel of life through that. I encourage you as doctors, as lawyers, as nurses, to be those who go forth and proclaim that gospel of life in how you live and in your daily practices. Be assured of my prayers and support for you, and know that I, as bishop, depend on you as Christ depends on you, to be those who give witness to his gospel and to life. Thank you. For many Catholics, they really do not understand the teaching on human sexuality. That said, I believe that Pope John Paul the Great really has brought a transformation through his theology of the body. And that teaching is just now being really taught in a clear, understandable manner. Now, we as bishops need to be the ones who promote that within our own diocese and particular churches. Several years ago, when I was Bishop of Fargo, in 2000, it was either 2004 or 2005, I mandated that all couples preparing for marriage had to go through not just an information session on natural family planning, but had to go through the entire course. So with some of the programs that meant 3 to 4 months. And they were one-on-one meetings with couples who practiced NFP. When I first mandated it, there was all sorts of anxiety that we did not have enough couples. And I just told our Respect Life office person, we're doing it, and we'll see where it goes. And with that, the transformation over the last 7 years was incredible. And particularly the feedback that we received from people. There was one whose comments I will never forget, a young woman who said she was very angry and that she had not been taught this in high school. And when I saw that, I made the decision then to start teaching it in high school, and the theology of the body for teens. But she went on to state, I would have been saved from a lot of heartache in college, a lot of mistakes, and I'm going back and telling my younger sister what to do and how to understand the teaching of the church. And so I think it's important for us to really promote natural family planning, help people to understand it, and especially the mutual responsibility in the couple, and also helping them to understand the problems that open up when you separate the unitive from the procreative. I am a firm believer that within reason you can understand that if you separate the unitive from the procreative, you can pretty much justify any type of sexual behavior. And so with that, and that it removes the dignity of the human person. And within my experience, at least in the Fargo Diocese with our younger couples, probably 70% or more of them were using NFP or were very open to looking at it. And there were a number of couples who, they had large families still in Fargo, 5, 6, 7, 8 kids, and nobody would blink an eye at it. And it was perfectly accepted, it was seen as a good, and all. And so we too need to look at our own attitudes towards children, towards family life, what we provide our children, and children don't need their own private bedrooms and everything else that is there, nor do teenagers for that matter. And it just it's eye-opening when you begin to talk with people in the rural area. And there's one family, they have 2 sons who are priests, but they had 9 boys and 5 girls. And the 9 boys all lived in the basement, and it was just one big kind of bunkhouse. And so and it's amazing to see how close the family is and everything else. But it's important for us to really present the good of natural family planning and the good of human sexuality. Because I think that we as Catholics, after the encyclical of Paul VI on Humanae Vitae, that with that encyclical we became gun shy. And it was, well, how do we begin to appease people? And we have to remember with our faith, and when we look at Jesus, he did not appease people. And that conflict is going to be a part of the gospel. And we have to be willing to accept that. I mean, the cross is there. And so helping people embrace that truth with a sense of freedom, and the freedom it does give, the true freedom it gives them, in terms of how they relate to each other and communicate with each other, and that there is beauty in it, and so helping them to do that. But I think the theology of the body and the real promotion of the theology of the body is the response, and I think that John Paul II saw that clearly. One time I was meeting with a reporter, and I said, we'll put God and religion aside, and we'll talk strictly science. I said, you tell me when your life began. Well, she started thinking about it. She became very uncomfortable. She got somewhat angry. But she finally had to say, at conception. And I said, well, then, if your life began at conception, who is the one who bestows dignity on life? And why does your life today have more dignity than it did at the moment of conception? And so it's really helping them to think and to see the reality of what is happening. And that a unique, distinct human being is destroyed every time an abortion takes place. But I have found asking questions and the pointed questions, and not even entering into discussion around the existence of God or that kind of thing, that it's much easier to bring them to the truth of what they're doing. Or they'll say, well, that's your truth. And the easy response to that is, you mean you don't believe in truth? And then pointing out to them where they do believe in truth. And it is, if somebody says, my truth is that the change that I give you for a $10 bill, and I'm supposed to give you $5, but I give you nothing back because my truth tells me that that isn't right, or my truth tells me that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. Well, people look at you like you're nuts. But I mean, that's where our society has gotten to. And once you begin to point out you do believe in truths, then they begin to think, maybe I do believe in truth. And it's something that needs to be looked at and can be discovered. But the Socratic method of asking questions is extremely important, and really trying to help people to come to recognize the truth.
My name is Jenny Kraska. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Catholic Conference, which is the public policy and lobbying arm of all 3 Catholic dioceses in the state of Colorado. And what I want to just touch on briefly tonight are some of the practical ways that you can get involved this election season and continuing past the election season. The bishops have been very clear in saying to us that we have not only a right but a duty to be involved in public life and in the public square. And that happens in many different ways. Not all of us are called to run for office, but if you are, please discern that call because it's important that we have good people in office. But there's other ways to get involved. And I know for some of you who have heard me talk before, I give this example a lot, but I think it's an important one for those of you who haven't heard it. When I moved here in 2007 from Minnesota, I went and introduced myself to all of our elected officials up at the state capitol. And a senator sat down with me and said, Jenny, I'm really glad you're here and I'm happy that you're doing the work that you're doing, but how are you going to get Catholics involved? And I said to him, I'm like, are Catholics not involved now in the political process? And he said, let me give you an example. Last session, we had a bill to regulate horse massage therapy in Colorado, and I got more phone calls and more emails about that bill than any other issue. Now, I laughed at first because I had no idea there was such thing as horse massage therapy. I thought, oh, this must be a Colorado thing. But then as I reflected on it, I was really struck by how unfortunate that is. Because we have such an important voice in our community that I think sometimes we are afraid to express. We get told all the time that there should be this separation between church and state, that your faith is something that is lived in between four walls on Sunday and should not be taken out. I get told that almost daily when I am up at the state capitol. That there's no need for you to be here. Church is about that building across the street on Sunday. And that's really the wrong attitude to have, because I can tell you from my experience that every day that I am up at the Capitol and every day that I'm not at the Capitol, there are other voices and other groups that are speaking very loudly about lots of different issues, and most often they don't agree with us. And so our voice is needed more than ever in the public square. And I think obviously every 4 years is a good opportunity for us to reflect on that, because we are faced with a presidential election. And as we know, elections have consequences, and we live with those consequences, for the next 4 years until another election comes along. And so I think that is something that we need to think very strongly and very deeply about. As the Archbishop mentioned, we have a duty to form our consciences, and there are many ways that we do that, but we have to be open to that formation. And so I would encourage you this season that we are in with elections to really take an opportunity to read and to learn about where the church stands on issues of public policy and moral issues. The bishops put out a document called Faithful Citizenship, and it's really a tremendous document that is full of great reflections for this time that we're in. And I would encourage you it's available on the bishop's website, it's available on our website, to really take some time to read that whole document. Because I think sometimes, pieces of it get thrown in our face or get quoted, depending on what newspaper or what television station we're reading, to suit the needs of those people. But the document as a whole offers really great reflections for us in this election season. I've also included some of that material, a bulletin insert. It's a one-page document that sort of gives a brief synopsis of Faithful Citizenship for you to look at as well. Also, sort of piggybacking on what the Archbishop said about the spiritual side of it, the bishops are going to be hosting a novena. It was just announced today for Life and Liberty during the month of October. It'll be starting on October 14th. And it will kick off with a mass at the Basilica in Washington, D.C. And everything will be on EWTN, both the TV station and online. So I would encourage you, I included some information over on the table about that. Obviously, all of us cannot be in Washington, D.C. on the 14th, but we can participate by saying the rosary that day and continuing the novena on with the rest of the church in the country. So those are really, some of the things that I wanted to touch on with you, because participation in public life takes many forms. So whether it is running for office, sending an email, or making a phone call to your elected officials, or most importantly, voting. Just yesterday I was on a conference call with some local churches here in Colorado, and a survey was done that demonstrates that over 50% of people who attend church services weekly are not registered to vote in the state of Colorado. If you're sitting here tonight and you're thinking, I might be one of those people, do not fear. The registration deadline is October 9th for the state of Colorado. So if you are not a registered voter in Colorado, you have until October 9th to register to vote, and to also encourage family and friends to register to vote, because a lot of times, we might be sitting next to somebody, even in our own households, at our own family events, and people are not registered to vote. So please, if you take nothing away from tonight, encourage family, friends, neighbors, people in your parish to get registered to vote before October 9th. Because it is very, very important that we have as many people as possible this election season exercising what is our right and duty as citizens and as Catholics here in Colorado.